My wife Sveta and I have been married for almost a quarter of a century, and I began to notice changes in her behavior. Her outings and the new style of clothing at work, which she justified with a promotion, really started catching my eye. She chose high-heeled shoes, wore lace lingerie, rings and chains, and short dresses to look on point. Intimate relations became a rare occurrence, and her frequent headaches and fatigue seemed like excuses. She even changed her perfume without asking for my opinion. At this stage, I began to wonder about Sveta's strange behavior, but I still believed in her fidelity, dismissing doubts. Throughout our family life, we had no reason for jealousy. Sveta was a beauty, and her attractiveness drew attention. She was not shy about flirting, and I had to endure her behavior. At the time of the transformation, our son, who was about to finish university and get married, had almost grown up. This meant that a new stage was beginning for both Mom and me. However, a year ago, with Sveta's business trips becoming more frequent, the changes became even more evident. She spent months away from home, justifying it with the expansion of the company's branches. We saw each other even less as I also began to travel frequently for work. One day, when I returned home, Sveta said she was pregnant. This was an unexpected turn for me. She suggested going through with the pregnancy, which evoked mixed feelings in me. The test results confirmed that we were having a girl. Despite all the changes, my inner world was on the verge of collapse. It seems like my wife Sveta has changed. I read that pregnant women usually experience a strong desire for intimacy, but it was the opposite for us. Sveta became irritable and avoided closeness. Even my touch elicited rejection from her. The pregnancy time passed quickly, and one rainy autumn night, I drove Sveta to the maternity hospital. I was 42 years old, the chief engineer at the concrete pipe plant, and already had some life experience. When Sveta gave birth, I was overjoyed. However, a call from a friend working at the hospital shocked me. He asked about my blood type, and when I answered, he informed me that our daughter had a type O blood, which was impossible since my wife and I had different blood types. It turned out that I might not be the father. This statement shook me, and my hopes of returning to the previous life collapsed. I felt that Sveta had become a past that couldn't be brought back. I opened the window, let in the cold autumn wind, and realized that men can cry too. My gaze fell on the rain-soaked vacant lot with protruding blades of grass. My pain was born inside me, and I aimlessly paced the room, trying to understand and accept what was happening.
And even my caresses became repulsive to her because I was not her father. Nature, as they say, follows its own laws, and what happened was an inevitable result that sooner or later had to come. Now it was my turn in this complicated story. I realized that I didn't understand the essence of how women can be fickle, ruthlessly leaving past love and seeking something new. Life, it seemed, did not give me any lessons, and I was forced to endure these difficult moments until morning. I had to visit the hospital and conclude this episode in my life. My grandfather's words came to mind. Never marry a woman who has had at least one previous man. I didn't pay attention to this wisdom in the whirlwind of love. With difficulty, I made my way to the kitchen on unsteady legs. I took a bottle of vodka from the refrigerator and emptied it. On the way to the hospital, I tried to pull myself together. Shouting and showing aggression were useless in this situation. The decision to talk to Sveta before filing for divorce was the only right one for me. Upon arriving at the maternity ward, I was invited to the head nurse. My heart raced again, anticipating a new storm. "Hello, have a seat," greeted me a pretty brunette, handing me a sheet of paper. Svetlana's handwriting was clearly visible on it, formalizing her refusal of the child. For some time I was in a stupor, unable to understand what was happening. "Yuri Pavlovich," continued the office manager, "your wife has filed a refusal and left the hospital early in the morning. She was picked up by some man." The doctor anticipated my question. "I don't know anything else. I know the girl is not your daughter, but you are officially her father in marriage with her mother. If you also sign the refusal, the child will be sent to the orphanage. However, she has been diagnosed with a heart prolapse, and the funds needed for a procedure of this level are beyond our reach. It's an expensive procedure, The only hope is that a well-off family will adopt the child and be willing to pay for the operation. I was stunned, silent. What could be said? After all, it's someone else's child. Why should I get involved in her life? After all, she has parents who also seem to show no interest in her, especially considering her health condition. Perhaps for her, death would be the best solution. You're right. Bring the paperwork, and I'll sign the refusal. I was aware that by my decision, I was depriving this little girl of her last chance. It's unlikely that someone will adopt her quickly, especially considering her health, and it's not always easy to find suitable care in orphanages. Emotions were swirling in my head, resentment towards the child's mother, my still wife, and the desire to end all of this as soon as possible. I filled out the standard refusal form and headed home. My decision seemed to overshadow Sveta's betrayal, as if the shadow over her treachery was now fading. Well, give me the divorce, and I'll forget her. As if it were a terrible dream, I thought to myself. But the subconscious reminded me, don't deceive yourself, you won't forget. Several times I shook my head, trying to rid myself of dark thoughts. I said goodbye to the doctor and headed towards the exit. Somewhere deep in the ward, a child's cry was heard. For some reason, I assumed it was the cry of the little girl deprived of the opportunity to live, cast into the whirlpool of life, callously condemned to death by her close ones. My legs carried me along the white corridor. I ignored the nurse trying to stop me. I stopped at the window, gazing into the spacious room. Bundles lay in sealed compartments, and only one baby cried, as if sensing something special. Yes, here she is, I whispered, turning around. The head nurse stood behind me. I looked again at the crying baby. Give me the paperwork, the head nurse requested, handing me the document. I crumpled it and put it in my pocket. She can be taken. No surgery will be needed. The doctor looked at me. Dear, prepare everything needed. I will provide the money, and who will accompany her to Germany. The doctor met my gaze. I'll take care of it at my own expense. Get ready for the operation, I said, turning around and briskly walking towards the exit. I already knew what to do, Yuri Pavlovich. And what will you name her? The head nurse asked loudly. Natasha, my son replied, somewhat indifferent to his mother's departure and the appearance of his sister. I didn't impose my opinion on him. I decided, let him decide how to behave in this situation. After some time, he got married and was deeply offended that I couldn't attend his wedding. Later, it became known that my son met Sveta, and she attended his wedding with her husband. Our relationship became colder, and our communication was mostly limited to congratulatory cards on holidays. I decided to sell my apartment and move into company housing. With the addition of funds from the sale of the car, I was able to cover the expenses for the surgery and rehabilitation. Everything went well. I even managed to hire a nurse, so my daughter grew up on natural breast milk. After about 6 months, I switched her to formula and took parental leave to care for the child. Apparently, this is also possible. I was appreciated at the enterprise and assured that after the leave, I would return to my previous position. A month after the surgery, I started the divorce process. The divorce happened quickly. Sveta did not appear in court, but through her lawyer, she gave her consent and signed all the necessary documents. She didn't know what was happening with her child, or to be precise, she didn't want to know. Thus, I remained with my little daughter. It is challenging to raise a child alone, even for a woman, and here I am, a man with a daughter. Of course, the mother helped as much as she could, but the main responsibility lay on me. Time passed, and Natasha grew up, becoming curious about her mom. I had to come up with a story about a doctor mom who travels the world helping little children. I even went to great lengths to maintain a connection with Natasha. I wrote letters on behalf of her mother, sent gifts, pretending they were from her mother. But despite all my efforts, Natasha still felt a strong longing for her mother, whom she had never seen. Over time, my daughter grew up, faced intimate questions her mother used to discuss with her. I even considered telling Natasha about women's health issues to prepare her for the future, but something held me back. When Natasha finished school, she enrolled in a university in Moscow. In fact, I arranged it for her, using my connections to secure a scholarship. Natasha always considered me her father, and even carried my last name. However, her life changed when Sveta entered it. Sveta found her in Moscow, and mother and daughter reunited. I could only speculate that Sveta told Natasha about my role, but it seems like my daughter accepted it and even moved to live with her in a prestigious cottage outside the city. After some time, Natasha married someone from high society. It seems Sveta orchestrated everything to ensure I wasn't invited to the wedding. After the wedding, Natasha called me and poured out all her resentment. She shouted about knowing that I'm not her real father and accused me of driving away her mother. I didn't bother listening and simply hung up. I was already 62 years old, and I headed to Vitebsk, to my mother's ancestral home, to start a new chapter in life. Though my heart ached from the hurt, I realized that I fulfilled my duty to my daughter, raised her, and provided her with an education. I understood that compared to her biological mother, I was just a human, ultimately a stranger. Natasha didn't ask me to make the decision to raise her. It was my independent initiative. I took on the responsibility, understanding that my daughter owed me nothing. My only prayer is for everything to be okay for her. In my memory, she remains a little girl, falling asleep in my arms, uttering those touching words, "Daddy, I love you." 2 years have passed. My life flows in the old house in a small town. Outside the window, it's late autumn. Rain throws handfuls of water, creating its own music. I sit on the old leather sofa, surrounded by an atmosphere of coziness. My gaze gets lost in the sounds of music coming from the old radio in the attic. Collecting old records has become my hobby, immersing myself in musical memories of a past life. At my feet lies a faithful companion, a large, shaggy dog, a living embodiment of a childhood dream. The memory of the past gradually fades, making room for new events. For 2 years, Natasha hasn't contacted me. I understand that her life is probably getting on track, and I am happy for her. Alone now, in front of me, only a photograph of a little girl with a teddy bear in an old wooden frame on the sideboard. The last reminder of past happiness. The record ends, and I flip it. The sounds of a long-forgotten melody fill the room, and at that moment, someone knocks on the door. Akbar lifts his head. I go to the door, and it opens. Natasha's gaze fixes on me, and our eyes meet. "Hello, Dad," she says, smiling apologetically. "Can I come in?" I look at her with a frozen gaze, experiencing a strange feeling.
She hadn't considered me a father for a long time, and she had made it clear in the past. "I'm not your father," I hoarsely said. "You decided that yourself." "You are my father," she said, walking into the house. "And I always have been." I looked at her. My heart silent, without emotions, repeated, "No, it's not me. Call me whatever you want, just so you can sleep peacefully at night." I sighed deeply and closed the door, returning to the room. Natasha sat on the couch, raindrops trickling down her leather coat. "What do you want, Natasha?" I asked. "Dad, we've been looking for you all this time, Dima and I, even Mom for 2 years. Dad, can you imagine what it cost us to find you?" "Well, how did you manage it?" I tried to suppress my emotions, and is that all you can say? "I find you after 2 years, and the first thing you want to know is how I found you." Natasha's face reddened with excitement. I remained silent, only closing my eyes from irritation. "You look different, Dad. This gray beard makes you look like Santa Claus," she said. I didn't comment on anything, only asked again, "Natasha, what do you want? For heaven's sake, Dad, what do you think I want?" My God, so much time has passed, not a word or sign from you. I didn't know where you were, what you were doing, if you were even alive. Natasha almost shouted, "Do you at least know that I'm married now?" I knew because I was there on that day, standing aside so that no one would recognize me, watching the festive evening in the restaurant, hiding behind a column until the host politely asked me to leave the hall. I saw Natasha putting the ring on the fingers of the young, attractive man she was going to marry. Before my eyes unfolded a scene where the woman who was once my wife held hands with her companion. My gaze was fixed on the guest, and changes occurred in her. From the girl I used to accompany to school, she transformed into a young, attractive woman. "So you were there, Dad. Why didn't you come over?" She was genuinely surprised. I just shrugged. "Stop calling me that, Natasha. I am not your father, neither biologically nor in any other way. We both know it. Isn't my last name yours? Weren't you the one who taught me to ride a bike, who comforted me when my first boyfriend dumped me, who made me smoke that pack of cigarettes until I got sick, who hugged me when I was scared and sang to me when I was feeling down? It wasn't you, was it? Dad, you still remain my father, even when you're not around." Natasha seemed ready to cry. "You just sit here and say nothing. What's wrong with you? You disappeared. No one heard from you for 2 years. And here I am, and you're silent. Mom was right. You're just avoiding life." I remained silent, motionless, holding on to the table to prevent my hands from clenching into fists. "You better leave, Natasha," I said in a quiet voice, realizing that nothing had changed. "No, Dad, no. I won't leave until I understand what happened. You just disappeared. You left me. You abandoned Mom in the maternity ward. How could you do that? You made her give me up. I tried to keep myself together as far as I can remember. Your final words reminded me that my mom's new husband would be a better father than I am. You showed enough maturity to realize how you hurt me with those words. You can't just come to me, call me a coward, and then expect me to embrace you just because you found me. You don't have that right. 2 years ago, you rejected me, tearing away the last support I had. You knew what you were doing, and still, you continued. So, go to hell, Natasha, you, your brother, and your mother. I'm obviously not your father, and I never was. I left for a reason, and now I can't see anything but those times. Everything you did, meeting me, just brought back the past. And I spent a lot of time and effort trying to forget about it. Apparently, it wasn't enough. I stood up and took out papers from the desk. Natasha's birth certificate, Svetlana's statement of refusal of the child, bills for the operation, receipts for tuition payments. Take them, read them at your leisure, and now, leave. All night, sitting in a small room of a provincial hotel, Natasha read the time-yellowed documents. She started crying multiple times, whipping away tears with a handkerchief. According to the DNA test results, Yuri turned out to be her biological father. This sudden discovery deeply shook her. She spent a lot of time reevaluating her past and trying to connect what she knew and felt with what her father told her. By morning, the realization of his life and who she is finally burst out. Natasha was having a phone conversation with her mother, asking her questions that made her feel uncomfortable. In most cases, Svetlana avoided giving direct answers, trying to change the subject of the conversation. This forced Natasha to find answers to her questions on her own. At that moment, she promised herself that her relationship with her mother would change. What her mother did, and her own reckless actions regarding her father, horrified Natasha. She deeply sympathized with her father, who had been living all these years in solitude, abandoned by everyone, especially his daughter. Natasha didn't know what to do, but she was determined not to let him go, at least not again. She deserved the pain in her heart herself, but not him. Nevertheless, he carried her image within him for years. She needed to make him see that she wanted to be his daughter and no one else's. When Natasha arrived at her father's house, she was struck by a sense of emptiness. She looked around but didn't find the car he usually used. Natasha anxiously looked around for someone who could clarify the situation. "Are you looking for accommodation, dear?" A creaky voice sounded behind her. Natasha turned around. "Hello, where's the owner?" she asked the elderly woman. Apparently the neighbor left, taking the dog and moving out, but she left the keys. He told me where he was heading. Natasha's heart froze. "No, dear." The woman stood silently staring at the empty house. Natasha never saw her father again. She tried to find him for many years, but unsuccessfully.